If you have dreams of chasing bugling bulls or elusive mule deer, I want to help you go on that hunt. If I were starting from zero in 2025 with Western hunting and I wanted to go on a hunt this year, this podcast episode is going to break down my exact plan for what I would do. If you have been saying that you want to go on a Western hunt year after year, if you keep saying one day you'll go, or if this is a dream that you have and you've just never been able to make it happen, if you have dreams of chasing bugling bulls or elusive mule deer, I want to help you go on that hunt this year. If you're wondering who is this guy, if you've never watched me before and why should you trust me, my name's Andrew Lukosevic. I started hunting in 2018 after I got out of the Marines. I have hunted 7 different states. I've chased whitetails, pronghorn, elk, mule deer, upland birds, waterfowl. I've tried to hunt just about everything, but my passion is going out west and chasing elk, mule deer, and pronghorn. So, welcome to the Endure Hunt Podcast. Join me as I share my experiences as an emergent hunter, offer advice on how to overcome challenges, and pursue your passion for hunting. Recently, I was on the East to West Hunts podcast with Alex Gruen. I will drop a link to that in the show notes or a card if I can do so on YouTube. And one of the last questions he asked me that stuck with me was, what advice would I give someone who is starting over? Or what advice I would give myself if I was starting over, starting from zero? Would I do it all the same way again, essentially? I focused my answers on hard work, scouting, and persistence, essentially. And I do agree with that advice for the most part. I realize that there is a more comprehensive question that I have been thinking about over and over and over since I left that podcast. As I mentioned earlier, I started hunting in 2018. My very first hunt ever was actually in Montana with an elk mule deer combination tag for that you can get as a non-resident. And I can't say that I would recommend it to anyone because it is not typical of how you go in. But it did something for me that I think is a big barrier to entry for most people, which is just getting out on that first hunt. Let me give a little bit of a breakdown on how I ended up on my first hunt, and then we can dive into what I would do if I were starting with 0 points in any of the Western states and how I would get a tag this year. So I was in the Marines and I was deployed in 2017. One of my best friends, Peter, asked me to go on a hunt with him. His now wife purchased a essentially DIY hunt with an outfitter. So you pay to stay at their lodge. They help you do the applications and you can stay there. They feed you all of that while you hunt DIY. This is Peter's first Western hunt. He has done deer hunting before, but he's never gone out west and he didn't want to go alone, understandably. So he asked me if I could go because I'm the only person that he knew that he trust physically enough to go out and do the type of rugged mountain type hunting that we're doing because of my experience in the Marines. At this time, I had 0 hunting experience. I didn't have a hunter's education. So I got my hunter's education from the state of Texas online while I was deployed. And at the time, I lived in New Jersey. I ended up living in Texas for 4 years, but that's another story. Got home from that deployment. I bought a 308 bolt action Savage rifle. That was the first one that I brought with me. I started shooting. I bought a bunch of random gear. I did not have matching camo. I bought stuff from Dick's Sporting Goods, Bass Pro, wherever I could find. I drove 2 hours, I think, to the Bass Pro or Cabela's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I don't remember whether it's Bass Pro or Cabela's, and I bought everything I could find. We had no clue what we were doing. We used paper maps. We hadn't used Onyx or anything like that. We drove straight from eastern Pennsylvania all the way to southwest Montana, taking as few stops as possible. We hunted for 5 days with a high temperature of 15 degrees. Didn't see any elk. Saw several mule deer, but none that we could actually get a shot on. And then I became obsessed with hunting. Not just Western hunting, but hunting in general, and started hunting whitetails in New Jersey the next season. The reason I wouldn't recommend that to anyone is because I had no clue what I was doing. Peter had no clue what he was doing. We used paper maps. We didn't really plan anything. We just kind of got thrust into this situation. And ended up being a really great experience. And you might face that similarly, but there are tools and resources out there that I don't think you need to go in completely blind. You can make a plan and go. The big burden, I believe, is analysis paralysis. And that's what's causing most people to delay their dreams of getting into the West. I did some hunt consulting in 2024, trying to help people make a plan one-on-one to go on their first Western hunt. And the number one thing holding people back was not knowing where to start and seemingly having too many options. Now, my path was not ideal. I can't say that I would recommend going in blind, but as I mentioned at the start of that story, it removed the illusion of choice. I didn't have a choice. This was the hunt I was going on. So at that point, it was just enjoying the experience, learning, and making the most of the time that I was going to be out there. So the lesson there is once you go on your first hunt, everything gets easier. So my goal with this is to help you get on that very first hunt. If you have been saying you want to go out west and you want 2025 to be the year, then you have to make it the year. No more delays, no more waiting, no more excuses. You can do this. I'm assuming that if you're listening to this, you're probably already a hunter that has some experience and some gear. Chances are you have at least 85% of the stuff that you need to go out west. Your actual hunting gear itself, your hunting clothes, the camo, your weapon, all of that probably works already. You might need to pick up a tent or some things like that, but the vast majority of the gear that you have is already going to suffice for going out west. A lot of guys use gear needing a new bow or new arrow setup or a new rifle with a different cartridge. It's mostly excuses and guys wanting an excuse to either not go or buy more gear. Look, there's nothing wrong with buying gear, but you shouldn't use it as a crutch to not go out west. With the hard truth out of the way, let's make a plan to get you out west in 2025. Before I dive in, I want to give some of the criteria that I'm going to consider. So I'm going to recommend 3 states that you should look at. And the criteria that I'm looking at is essentially that you have an opportunity to draw a tag this year. I'm also looking where you can, where there is roughly more than 50% public land so that you have land that is actually accessible for you to figure it out. As I give my examples, you should know that this is the general criteria that I have in my head in the background, that you'll be able to draw basically 100% with no points. There's either OTC or 100% draw, and there's at least 50% public land that's accessible for hunting. Now, to truly make the most out of this, and an area that we have grown significantly technology wise since I started Western hunting, is tools to research units so that you can know which units are worth spending your time in. Personally, I use GoHunt. I have no affiliation. I am not paid by them, not sponsored. Anyway, but I have been using them for the last 4 or 5 years, and I am a huge fan. But there are other tools out there like Hunting Fool, and I think if you have an Onyx membership, you actually get some free draw odd information and some hunt unit information. So whatever tool you can get access to, I would recommend, because it will help you take the advice that I'm giving and really create a unique plan suited just for you. If you don't want to spend money on a tool, many states do have draw odd information out and available if you're willing to download some spreadsheets, look at historical data from their websites, and crunch some numbers. So you can do it for free, but there are companies out there that have already done the hard work, and you just have to pay for access. Now, personally, for me, if you're watching this on video, you will see that I've got a few different things behind me. I've got this pronghorn over my right shoulder, my very first whitetail deer ever that I took in New Jersey with my bow. I've got a whitetail deer that I took in Texas last year, and then the rug for my axis that I took from Texas 2 years ago. What you don't see is the elk that's in my living room. And as much as I love pronghorn, for what drew me out west, it was elk and mule deer. I know a lot of people love pronghorn, and that you will often see videos on YouTube of guys saying, "Oh, yeah, you should go on your first Western hunt chasing pronghorn. It's fun. There's a lot of animals, yada, yada, yada." I agree with that. It is fun. There are usually a lot of animals. But if you're going to be hunting public land, realistically, it's going to take you a few years to draw a tag if you want a good hunt. Unless you have money to pay for private land access, I can't in full faith recommend you pursuing pronghorn. So my recommendations are going to be focused on elk and mule deer in this podcast. There are going to be options for archery, muzzleloader, and rifle in all of the states that I recommend. I looked specifically for some rifle hunts. For me, when I was starting, I wanted to focus on rifle because although you're dealing with more pressure, you have increased odds of success in filling that tag. And I do think that you're going to struggle your first time out there, and it's better to put as many things in your favor as possible. So my recommendation would be rifle, but if you really want to go after a muzzleloader tag or an archery tag, they're going to be even easier to get. I know I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast that my first hunt was in Montana, and you may be surprised to know that that is not in my list. So the three states that I'm going to recommend, the first is probably no surprise to anyone, is Colorado, then Utah, and last but not least, New Mexico. Those are the three states that if I were starting over with the experience that I have now, having now hunted 7 seasons, these are the states that if I were had to start over with nothing, these are the states that I would be focusing my efforts on. We're going to start with Colorado, and we're going to talk about elk. There were some big changes, and there are some big changes going into elk in 2025. The archery non-resident tags are all going to a draw now. There is no more over-the-counter archery. They do still have over-the-counter rifle tags in some units. You know, you have to research the specific unit. But for me, I am not a huge fan of over-the-counter. I try and avoid it as much as possible. For the most part, there are a few exceptions out west, but generally, I try to avoid it. There are rifle draws that you can get with 0 points. There are hunts in first, second, third, and fourth rifle. I would recommend, if you've never hunted out west and you're not used to both high alpine, difficult terrain, actually, or if you're not used to high alpine, difficult terrain, and tons of snow, probably avoid the fourth season. If it were me, I would be focusing on first or second season. But there are hunts available with 0 points at or near 100% draw odds throughout the state of Colorado. Now, moving on to mule deer, there are no over the counter hunts for mule deer in Colorado. I'm not aware of any state out west that has over the counter mule deer hunts. So just assume everything is going to be a draw. Most of the hunts that you're going to find for mule deer in Colorado that are draw are going to be in that second and that third rifle season, with a couple in the fourth season. So Colorado would be my number one choice. I think it has the most options, the highest population of animals, and there's a lot of research that you can do. State number 2 on the list is Utah. Utah, unlike Colorado, you're going to be limited just to over-the-counter options for elk. I've done the over-the-counter Utah elk hunt twice now. They have 2 different types of hunts. They have the any bull hunt and the spike-only hunt. And depending on what type of experience you're looking for, will determine which one you should apply for. Now, I've done the any bull hunt twice, and the reason I chose the any bull hunt is I wanted, one, an opportunity to take a branch antlered bull, but 2, I didn't want to make an improper judgment in the field, so I personally decided to go on the any bull hunt. If I were doing it again, I'm not sure if I were to do that. I might go after the spike hunt just because it's good experience. Plus, the spike hunts are actually in the more desirable units. So you would be hunting the same units that the guys that have been putting in for 15 plus years, probably 20 plus years at this point, how Utah's draw is, chasing the biggest bulls that they have. So you would be in those same units. You would be experiencing the crazy rutness, probably a tiny little bit less hunting pressure. I'm not sure. I haven't done that one myself. All for the chance of taking a spike and experience some of the best units that Utah has to offer. Both of these are optional for you. The last time I hunted this, there were 15,000 tags available. That's for the rifle. They have unlimited archery tags, so truly over the counter for both of these. If you want to hunt elk in Utah this year, that is how you do it. Mule deer, they have a general deer hunt, then a limited entry deer hunt. For the purposes of going this year, they do have hunts just like Colorado that you can apply for and draw with 0 points, but there are options in the state of Utah if mule deer is what you want to go after. And the third and final state on my list, if I were starting from 0 and had no points and wanted to go out west this year, is New Mexico. I'm not sure how many lists New Mexico makes for something like this, but the big advantage of adding New Mexico to your rotation of applications is that they don't have a point system. Utah, Colorado, Montana. I just realized I never explained why Montana is not on my list. Montana is not on my list because for the first time in a few years, you have only about a 50% draw odd with no points. So they have a weird point system. I'm not going to get into it on this episode, but unless you're going guided or with an outfitter, I can't say that I would recommend going in Montana as if you want to hunt this year. But back to New Mexico, there are no points. It is a random draw. Everyone has the same opportunity in New Mexico, and that is what makes it a great state to apply in, whether you want to hunt mule deer, pronghorn, elk, you name it, because they have exotics in the state too. Everyone has the same drawing opportunity. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great opportunity. Some units you're going to have less than 1% draw odds, and some you're going to have, I think, 20 to 25. There's no over the counter hunting, and this sort of doesn't fall in line with my 100% draw odds rule that I was trying to use in the beginning. But there's always a chance, and I would recommend bringing New Mexico in as a backup so that if for some reason there's point creep or something changes with the draw odds and you don't pick one of the over the counter options in Utah or Colorado, New Mexico could be that hunt for you. I wouldn't recommend it as your first choice. It should never, in my opinion, really should never be your first choice for any of your hunt planning. But it is a state that I highly recommend because it's one of the few states where everyone is on a level playing field. And I didn't want to end with just three. Throwing a bonus state out there, a fourth state that I would consider. Longtime listeners and viewers of the podcast should not be surprised by this by any stretch of the imagination. But my bonus state that I would encourage you to apply in is Arizona. It's a bonus option, didn't make the top three because the chances of you drawing a tag your first year of applying is almost zero. Like New Mexico, it should not be considered your primary state. They use a hybrid draw system, but because of that draw system, there is always a chance of drawing a tag. I drew my 2022 Arizona elk late rifle hunt with 1 point and 7% draw odds. So I included Arizona because it is one of my must apply states personally every single year. And there is always a chance. It happened to me. Maybe it'll happen to you. So I've talked a lot about high level, like these are the things I would consider, these are the options that you have. But what would I do if it were me and I was starting over with nothing? What would I personally actually do? And that's how I'm going to end this podcast, is tell you what I would do. I'm not going to say units, but I will say species, state, and what my plan would be. I have been on a mule deer kick lately. I've gone on several mule deer hunts now. It is the one species that has evaded me that I have been hunting for. And for that reason, I would likely target Colorado if I was starting over. I would want to go on a second rifle tag personally. And I would focus on, in my personal strategy, I try to find units where it's 70% or more public land, but I have hunted and would hunt again units that are at that 50% mark. I wouldn't go lower than that unless I had inside baseball and someone that I knew had hunted that unit and gave me waypoints or something. But starting from square zero with nothing, I'm going Colorado, second rifle hunt. I would apply for Arizona as a backup, which again should surprise no one that's been listening to this podcast for a long time. I love Arizona. Now, just because this is what I would do doesn't necessarily mean it's what you would do. I do want to summarize, so I think realistically, if you are someone who has been saying for years that you want to hunt out west, you've just never put it together, and this is the year you're making 2025 the year, Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico. Those are the states that I would consider, assuming you cannot go guided or pay for private land access. I would focus on elk and mule deer. You're going to have the most opportunity there. They're going to be the hunts that I feel like most people are going after in the West. And there are different types of hunts and styles that you can do for the various weapon types. I talked mostly about rifle hunts on this, but there are options for archery and muzzleloader if you are competent in those. I hope you take this information and you use it to get out on that hunt this year. I would love nothing more but to get tagged during hunting season by someone who listened to this podcast and went on their first elk or mule deer hunt. Even if you don't get anything, if it's just a selfie in the woods, that would make me so happy. When I started this podcast, I wanted to share my experiences to help people start hunting, not necessarily Western hunting, just in general. And that's still what I want to accomplish. So if you have questions, if you want to share your experience and that you went out and you finally did it, you made this year the year, I would love for you to reach out to me on Instagram at Endurhunt, ENDURHUNT. Shoot me a DM, tag me in something, would love that. Application season is officially underway. Some states close at the end of January. I'm going to have this podcast released in the middle of January, but those applications are coming and going really fast. So no more excuses. This is the year you're saying you're doing it. Do it. Hold yourself accountable. Put the application in. Pick a state, pick a species, apply, get out there, have a good time, learn lessons, and then keep going at it. And the next thing you know, you'll become a Western hunter. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I do hope that you got some value out of it. I say this at the end of every podcast, but time is our most valuable resource, and I do not take it for granted that you chose to spend it with me. I hope this was valuable to you. I would love to hear from you, like I mentioned earlier. Good luck out there on those hunts. Get after it. I know I will be, and I'll see you all next time.